This is a segment that we've been eyeballing for a little while. Just like the UAW strike was a slow drip on the way in, it was a slow drip on the way out because first Ford and the UAW came to a deal, then Stellantis, and now finally General Motors reaches tentative deal with the United Auto Workers Union, ending strikes at the Detroit automakers after 6 weeks on the picket line. The United Auto Workers and General Motors have agreed to a deal that will put an end to bargaining between the union and Detroit automakers following more than 6 weeks of targeted U.S. labor strikes, the sides confirmed hours after sources told CNBC about the deal. GM is the final Detroit automaker to reach a deal with the union following historically contentious talks. Roughly a third of the union's 146,000 workers with GM, Ford Motor, and Stellantis went on strike after the sides failed to reach agreements by a September 14th deadline. So at no point was even close to half of the workforce actually on strike, and they were able to make this happen. The UAW said the tentative agreement, which still must be ratified by members, adds battery workers from GM's Ultium Cells joint venture and a division known as Subsystems into the union's master agreement with the company. That was one of the concerns. The transition to electronic vehicles meant they were going to want to unionize some non-union shops, which it seems that they have succeeded in doing. Later in the article, the pact also includes 25% pay increases over the terms of the agreement. The raises and benefits, such as cost of living adjustments, they call that COLA in shorthand, cumulatively raise the top wage to more than $42 an hour, including an increase of 70% for starting wages to over $30 an hour, the union said. That increase would be at least 2 percentage points higher than the Ford and Stellantis deals. A UAW spokesman did not immediately respond for the difference in starting pay. However, it may be based off of COLA estimates. Those deals also reinstated cost of living adjustments, reduced an 8-year path to the top wages to 3 years, so that's good, and allowed the right to strike over plant closures, among other significantly enhanced benefits. I'll stop for a second because the right to strike over future plant closures is hugely important because despite this deal, the bigwigs at these automakers are still saying that the transition to electronic vehicles has the potential to put 40% of the workforce out of work because they're saying that EVs are 40% less labor intensive than the cars that they make now. And so the fact that they have reserved the right within this contract to strike against any future plant closures is huge. Even if they can't save all of the jobs, they will be able to renegotiate terms, maybe retirement packages, severance packages for people who are ultimately laid off, right? So that's a big win there. One last card here. The strikes have collectively cost GM, Ford, and Stellantis billions of dollars in lost production. Ford said Thursday that the union strike, forgot to hit the music. Oh, where's my violin? Oh, where is it?
I'll find it. You do your thing.
I screwed up. Yeah, find my violin. There it is. The strikes have collectively cost GM, Ford, and Stellantis billions of dollars in lost production. Ford said Thursday that the union strike has cost it $1.3 billion, and the deal, if ratified by members, would increase labor costs by roughly $850 to $900 per vehicle produced. GM said Tuesday the strike had costed about $800 million. The proposed agreements are record-setting for the union, which was far more confrontational and strategic during the talks than in recent history. It's not immediately clear how much the labor deals will increase labor costs for the companies, which had argued that giving in to all of the union's demands would affect their competitiveness and even long-term viability. Deutsche Bank recently estimated the overall cost increase of the agreement at Ford to be $6.2 billion over the term, $7.2 billion at GM, $6.4 billion at Stellantis. So this is all but certain to be ratified. Sean Fain seems very happy with how everything turned out. I obviously had my skepticism at the start of this because of that very abrupt shift in strategy from an all-out strike where everybody walked off the job all at once to this sort of stand-up rolling strike that they ended up implementing at the last minute, much to the chagrin, it seemed, of many of the rank and file. But it seems like in 6 weeks, they are happy with the deal that they got. And just to clarify, because I know I got some shit for this, and I brought Shama Sawant on, and she took some shit for what she said on our show. I said from day one, I was never rooting against the strike. Like I never called Sean Fain a phony or a fraud or an imposter or an infiltrator. I just thought it was strange that you had a union vote 97-3 to ratify a strike, the assumption meaning a strike is a strike, and then the abrupt change in strategy at the end, which coincided with a bump in the stock price, which usually signals the workers are about to take it in the ass.
Fixes in, yeah.
I thought, what's going on here? This doesn't seem right. But I never said that they were better off not striking than doing this. I never said they're better off just taking the deal they have on the table now and they shouldn't go on strike. Obviously, better this strategy than no strategy. Who knows if they could have got a better deal if they walked out all at once. We'll never know that. But the rank and file seem happy from what we're reading with these terms, and they got it done in 6 weeks, and only a third of them ever had to go out on strike. So it seems like good news for the auto workers here. Of course, the big question going forward is the transition to electronic vehicles, because a lot of those questions remain unanswered, and the ability to strike moving forward, if they get screwed in that transition, that was, I think, long-term will end up being the most significant part of this, even more than the wage increases, because that's existential for the entire industry.
All right, so what we do know is the stock of all of these automakers have completely tanked. So the deal is real, folks. That's how you know.
Right.
Their stocks are buried and really unable to recover, at least thus far. Also, Ford, it was kind of obliquely mentioned in that article. They did their earnings report on Thursday, and Wall Street was not impressed. Although their profitability did increase year over year, I believe there was they came in under estimates for revenue and earnings per share. And they are also laying off on EVs. They had they were really ramping up to challenge Tesla on its dominance, opening battery plants. I believe they already built one. They're delaying the other, and they are scaling back their investment because purchases of EVs right now have slowed, partly because of the price. You know, we got crazy interest rates right now. Who wants to take out a car loan? So yeah, it seems like, and this is not just Ford, across the board, the automakers are going to kind of lay back. They're feeling they got a little too aggressive with the EVs. So in terms of the labor implications, it looks like that's going to be delayed for a little bit anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is certainly something that we'll have to keep an eye on, and that's like one of the reasons why I think having that contingency where, hey, we can strike if we don't get as just a transition as we feel we need was a very important part of it. And honestly, I'm a little surprised that they got that. I guess that was a real sticking point. I guess they just wouldn't take it without that, because you would think that if the automakers were going to give up something, it would be that. Because, look, wage increases cost them money, right? They don't like to lose money, but they can make money back, right? This is a little bit more in the realm of long-term uncertainty, right? And that's something that scares the shareholders more than a temporary loss in money that they can make up for next quarter or next year or next couple of years, right? The transition to EVs is something that nobody really knows quite what that looks like yet. Exactly. And part of what is a concern for not only people who work in the industry, but for people who drive cars as the price of gas goes up and down is there's a real question of is this going to be a race to the bottom? In which case, workers will ultimately get really screwed, right? Like if there just happens to be this competition, okay, who can make this stuff for the cheapest? Because at that point, the non-unionized houses have an upper hand. Tesla's workforce is non-unionized. They're pay rate when you factor in benefits and everything is about $45 an hour. There was a report that said pay rates when you factor in benefits and the value that's added from the pension and things like that, the real wage here is about $80 an hour now that they got this deal inked, when you take into consideration the value of the health packages and everything.
Well,
so that's a big win, but that's something that, like I said, if it becomes this race to see, okay, who can make the most EVs for the cheapest, if it becomes imperative, that's something that the workers are going to have to navigate. And having that strike provision in there could prove to be really important, a few years down the road.
Tesla's getting killed right now also because their sales are coming in under expectations. So there is this mass move by consumers to back off on what had just been a long march of increasing EV sales. For the first time in many years, it looks like consumers are going away from EVs again, because of the cost. Now, this should be an example to other unions and other workers. Look, in the end, if the workers get together and stop going to the Amazon warehouse, they're going to have to give in. That's how strikes work. In the end, how do they afford it? Well, this has always been what we've said about this. I mean, it's just common sense. They have juiced their stock prices and juiced executive compensation for decades at the expense of the workers. That's a big part of how we wound up with this very third world version of the United States we live in today, where increasingly you don't have a middle class. You have a very rich class and everybody else is living paycheck to paycheck. Well, if you want to reverse the last several decades, you're going to have to go and look at what your great-grandparents did. You're going to have to take on these companies and make them less profitable for their shareholders and their executives. Doesn't mean they can't function, they can't do business. If that were the case, they wouldn't have taken this contract, right? It means the stock price is not going to be as high as it was, and that's indeed the case. And eventually, maybe they'll get around to cutting executive compensation. It's not the end of the fucking world. A stock price that can only be supported by exploitative wages is a stock price that shouldn't be. Bring it back to what it should be worth with a well-paid workforce.
Please clap.